In this video, I'm going to explain how intuitive eating works and whether or not it can potentially help you reach your goals. Now, if you've been around the fitness or nutrition industry the past few years, then maybe you've heard of something called intuitive eating. Intuitive eating isn't actually a specific diet or even a specific structure of eating. It's actually a way of eating that is based on certain principles. Now, intuitive eating isn't something that's as established as something like the keto diet or intermittent fasting. So it's not like there's a strict template that every person must follow. Like I said, intuitive eating is based on certain principles, which we'll analyze in a few moments. Now, as far as I'm aware, the term intuitive eating was first established in a book written back in 1995 by Evelyn, Tribole and Elyse Resch called Intuitive Eating, a Revolutionary Program That Works. Now, granted, some of the principles of intuitive eating may have been followed much earlier than that, but the term in general was coined at around that time. Now, the general philosophy behind intuitive eating is to reject the diet mentality. And by that we mean rejecting the idea of viewing food and nutrition as a tool and being stingy about things like calories, macronutrients, and the sort. Intuitive eating promotes enjoying food while following your body's natural cues such as hunger and satiety. You'll understand more about what intuitive eating is actually about once we cover its principles. Now, I'm going to cover intuitive eating's principles one by one, give you my own take on them, and then at the end I'm going to look at intuitive eating as a general concept and give you my own personal opinion on it. These principles are from the author's official website called intuitiveeating.org, which will be linked down in the description if you guys want to check it out. I'd like to point out that I haven't actually read the book, so I'm going to be covering the principles as I see them on the website, as well as how I see intuitive eating being practiced in the general population. Another thing to remember is that intuitive eating isn't meant as a go-for solution for everyone. And from what I've seen, it's not promoted as such. Intuitive eating was mostly created for people that have been traditionally dieting for extended periods of time as a means to help them recover and redevelop more healthy relationships with food. That said, it has become sort of a trend lately, that's why I'm covering it. So with that out of the way, let's start. Principle number 1, reject the diet mentality. By the way that it sounds, this principle can be interpreted very differently from how it's actually explained in the website. On the website, it's stated that what you should be rejecting is the idea that there's one perfect specific diet that can help you or that can promise you that you will lose weight fast and never put it back again. And rejecting this kind of mindset is something that I completely agree with. There's no one perfect diet. Any good nutrition plan is based on certain principles that are specifically applied to the individual. A diet that's great for me may be terrible for you and vice versa. I also disagree with the idea of thinking that all your problems are gonna be fixed by following a diet. And if you don't succeed, then that must mean that the diet wasn't effective. Something that I preach about all the time is the need for people to build long-term lasting habits. Fail to do that and any diet you follow is probably ultimately going to be ineffective because either A, you won't follow it for long enough to actually see good results, or B, you'll just eventually put the weight back when you stop. People, and especially beginners, should be encouraged to be focusing on changing their lifestyle one habit at a time, instead of simply focusing on one specific diet or program. Now that said, I'm not actually opposed to people following diets or nutrition plans. Depending on your goals, then a nutrition plan may in fact be necessary for you to succeed. For example, if you're aiming for a bodybuilding camp, then you're going to need some kind of plan. Maybe not a full-on meal-by-meal diet plan, but at least some sort of structure about how your nutrition is gonna be laid out. When you're trying to reach an actual physical goal, especially a difficult one, it's there that nutrition becomes something more than just a part of a healthy lifestyle. It becomes a tool, a factor, something that you'll need to optimize if you want to see great results. It's also worth mentioning that many people actually prefer to have their nutrition written down instead of actually having to think on the spot about what they should eat. So all in all, while I do think that people, and especially beginners, should be directing their focus more on building long-term lasting habits, I do see the importance of nutrition plans, calorie counting, and the sort, especially when it comes to certain goals. And there's really nothing stopping you from doing both at once. Sure, you can follow a nutrition plan or some sort of program, but you can also direct your focus on building long-term lasting habits. Principle number 2, honor your hunger. The meaning behind this principle is very simple. When you're hungry, eat. And I have sort of mixed feelings about this one. Now, I do believe that we should generally be fighting against unhealthy relationships with food. If you're neurotic about eating 50 calories because your daily calorie intake goals are only 1500 calories, then yeah, that's probably not the best idea, and it's probably not the best thing for your psychological health. I also believe that if you're trying to lose weight and you're on a program, something like a cutting routine, and you're constantly hungry, then it's probably best if you reconsider your food choices or maybe your calorie intake and the sort. Now, that said, I don't like the sort of statement that all dieters seem to be poor souls that are constantly hungry but don't eat because they want to lose weight. I don't know if that's what the writers were trying to imply. Maybe not, but this is kind of how I got it. And it actually reinforces, the stereotype that is associated with going on a diet, that you're gonna be constantly starving. And sure enough, there is a big portion of people that do exactly just that. Follow very strict programs and starve themselves, all in effort to lose weight a little bit faster. But dieting or following a nutrition plan doesn't have to, or actually shouldn't, be like that. It is entirely possible to follow a nutrition plan while still being fairly satisfied and not hungry. You can do that by simply decreasing your weight loss progress so that you won't be too restricted, choosing lower calorie foods, tempering with meal frequency, exercising, etc., etc. I also believe that hunger oftentimes is actually a conditioned response, and it doesn't necessarily mean that every time you get hungry you should immediately eat something, but that's a topic for another video. The writers advocate honoring your hunger as it's going to prevent you from overeating later on, which is something that I tend to agree with, at least for most people. But anyone that has experimented with intermittent fasting can tell you that A, hunger is something that it can be controlled, and B, hunger comes and goes. It's not like if you get hungry at 10 a.m. and you don't eat, then you're gonna be continuously getting hungrier until you eat, let's say at 1 p.m. I don't consider this to be bad advice by any means. I just think that hunger is something that can be controlled, and you don't necessarily to eat the second that you get a little bit hungry. Principle number 3, make peace with food. The idea behind this principle is to not restrict yourself when it comes to food choices, but also food quantity, as this may cause feelings of deprivation that will pile up and eventually backfire and cause you to overeat on something that you didn't want to. And I tend to agree with this statement. I do believe that chronic restriction can and most probably will result in a breakdown at some point. But there are several things that need to be addressed here. First of all, if you want to meet a specific goal, such as weight loss, then some sort of restriction or discomfort has to be applied. Because if not, then you'll stay exactly the same as you are right now. You can think of how you are right now as your baseline, as your comfort zone. So naturally, if you want to change something, then this means that you'll have to get a little bit out of your comfort zone and do something that, at the very least, a little bit discomforting. This principle doesn't seem to take into consideration the "I'm used to it" factor. Just because you feel restricted on something right now doesn't mean that you'll feel restricted in a month from now. For example, if you're used to eating dessert after lunch and then you suddenly cut it because you're trying to shred some pounds for the summer, then yeah, at the beginning it's going to feel like a restriction. It won't always feel like a restriction, it's going to be the new natural at some point. I think it all comes back to habits. If you're smart about what you're restricting and you know your limits and you're building small habits at a time, then you can potentially change your life around and restrict yourself on many things without actually feeling restricted. What I mean by that is that when I was a teenager and I first got into fitness and nutrition and all that stuff, my diet was pretty horrible. I was used to eating out, I was used to eating chocolate but slowly, over time, one small habit at a time, I changed all these things and now I don't feel restricted when I don't drink orange juice with my lunch or when I don't eat a piece of chocolate for dessert. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, if you're trying to lose weight, then yeah, it's probably going to feel a little bit like work. Even if you've built a lot of habits, a lot of consistent habits, and you've turned your life around, losing weight, it's probably still gonna feel like a little bit of work. If you feel that you're overly restricted on something, but you need to do that in order to lose weight, then what you can simply do is follow that for a period of time, maybe it's 2 months, then take, a month off, then follow it for another 2 months, rinse and repeat. A weight loss program doesn't have to be a linear, continuous process. Now, granted, this is as long as your breaks don't undo all the work that you've done as you were trying to lose weight. Now, what I'm basically saying is that there's nothing wrong with pushing yourself, as long as you know your limits and you take breaks when it's necessary. Principle number 4, challenge the food police. This principle basically means rejecting the idea that certain foods are good or allowed and other foods are bad or forbidden. And I would mostly tend to agree with this. Establishing an allowed list for foods and a forbidden list of foods in your mind is probably just going to cause you to crave the forbidden foods even more. I generally advocate a more flexible approach to nutrition in which there are no good and bad foods, but there are helpful and not that helpful options. Now, personally, I always have a rough idea about how many calories and protein I need to consume within a given day. Eating cleaner options is simply going to make it much easier for me to stick to those goals. That said, if I really want to, I always have the option of eating something that's more unhealthy. It's just going to make it more difficult for me to stick to my goals, which means that I'll have to restrict myself more for the rest of the day. And that's flexible dieting 101. The fact that I know that I always have the option of eating anything that I want actually helps keep cravings to a minimum, and most of the time I do actually gravitate towards the healthier options. And obviously it is important to gravitate towards the healthier options, both for your physique and your health, but I do disagree with the notion of having forbidden foods. Principle number 5, respect your fullness. This basically means stopping when you're full and generally being aware of your fullness levels. And with this one, I agree 100% with, and I do believe that most of us are guilty of not paying that much attention to our fullness levels, especially when the food is tasty. It's a good practice to get into the habit of eating until you're sort of full instead of eating until you're about ready to explode. Granted, this is also going to be a great tool for weight loss. The only people that I would recommend eating past the level on which they are feeling satisfied are the people that are struggling to consume more calories, such as very skinny people with very fast metabolisms. Principle number 6, discover the satisfaction factor. From what I understand, this principle encourages you to be conscious and aware of how exactly eating something makes you feel. It's basically appreciating the satisfaction that derives from the eating experience. And I think this is a generally good principle, and practicing it can help you see food as something beyond just calories and macronutrients. That said, I'm a little bit wary about viewing food as a pleasure or entertainment source. And while I do understand that food is one of life's most basic and common pleasures, I would caution against viewing food as simply a pleasure or entertainment source. Now, in my opinion, the best solution is right around in the middle. Not simply viewing food as, calories and macronutrients, but also not simply viewing food as pleasure, being somewhere in the middle. Principle number 7, honor your feelings without food. This is another principle that I completely agree with. We're all at some degree guilty of eating emotionally. And there are several reasons why emotional eating is a bad idea. While eating chocolate may not sound as dangerous as drinking alcohol or doing drugs to fix your problems, it still provides the same fundamental problem, that you're looking for an external source to temporarily make you feel better. You're not actually fixing the problem, which usually distracts you from doing what's necessary, actually facing the problem and fixing it. I've mentioned in another video that your mind can be trained by teaching it how to react to certain situations or stimulations. And the same principle also holds true here. If you eat every time that you're not feeling that good, then what you're doing is that you're teaching your brain that food is the solution to not feeling great. You're reinforcing the subconscious bond that your mind has created, that feeling down equals having to eat. Now, ups and downs in life happen all the time. If your nutrition is subject to change whenever your mood changes, then it's going to be very difficult for you to stick to a proper nutrition or meet any sort of goal. If you start denying yourself indulging every time you don't feel that great, then you're eventually going to teach your mind that feeling down doesn't equate to eating, and the bond will eventually weaken and the cravings will also gradually disappear. Principle number 8, respect your body. And this is probably the one that I mostly disagree with. It basically promotes the idea that you should accept that you're born with a genetic blueprint and that you're always going to be at a certain shape and size. And you're always going to look a certain way because your genetics have decided so. And this is true to an extent, right? I mean, you can do all the training and nutrition that you want, but you're not going to get, taller legs or a smaller waist if your waist is naturally thick. But that doesn't mean that you can't maximize the results that you're going to see for your body frame and that you can't look good or even great. What I'm basically saying is that you can look great regardless of your genetics or your body frame or your size. And if we're talking specifically about weight loss, then there's really, apart from serious medical conditions like hypothyroidism, there's really no excuse for you to not lose weight if you want or should. Are there people that struggle more with losing weight because of their genetics? You bet. But does that mean that they can't or that they shouldn't attempt to lose weight? Absolutely not. It's perfectly possible for them to lose weight. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, I'll give myself as an example. I'm not a naturally skinny person. I'm not naturally fat or something, but my body really isn't that comfortable, walking around 10-12% body fat. I usually juggle around 15 to 16% body fat if I'm not being too careful with my diet and my training. For me to get to 10% body fat is something that's going to be a decent amount of challenge. But does that mean that I can't get to 10% body fat if I really wanted to? Absolutely not. I could get there and I could maintain that if I really wanted to. I just really don't care that much about it, so I don't really attempt that. But you don't have to be naturally skinny or naturally fit in order to be fit or in order to be at a certain level that you want. What's most important is what you want and what you're ready to give up for it. Unfortunately, life isn't fair and everyone is given a different set of cards. That said, you can use those cards to their maximum potential. The principle also mentions not being overly critical about yourself. And while I do believe that being a little bit hard on yourself and a little bit critical is important, being overly critical isn't going to help you anywhere, so you shouldn't be doing it. Principle number 9. Exercise, feel the difference. Now, this principle basically promotes the idea of finding pleasure in exercising for exercise's sake and not simply viewing exercise as a fat burning tool or a tool in general. And I do believe that you should develop deeper reasons to exercise apart from burning fat, at least at some point, but that doesn't mean that you can't also view exercise as a tool for reaching a goal. I don't really think that there's anything wrong with viewing exercise as also a tool to reach a specific goal or exercising past the point that is simply required to make you feel good. But this comes back to the question of what matters most to you, your goals or your personal feelings. For example, I'm very into strength building and recreational powerlifting. I want to get stronger. This means that I'll be spending a lot of my time doing exercises like deadlifts and squats, which are really difficult and honestly not that fun because I know that they're required to make me a generally stronger person. They don't particularly feel good, I do them because my goals require them. But that's just my personal opinion. If you want to exercise simply for the joy of exercising, that's absolutely fine. I'm just saying that there's nothing wrong with exercising for a specific goal. And finally, principle number 10, honor your health. Intuitive eating urges you to respect your health and your body by choosing healthier options, at least in the general grand scheme of things. It also states that you shouldn't be really worried about an unhealthy snack here or there, because it's what you eat consistently over a long period of time that's going to matter. And I would completely agree and add that this is exactly how I personally view my nutrition. I think it's how most people view their nutrition, and I think it's the most balanced and healthy way to go about things. Choosing healthy options in general, but not really stressing out when you eat an unhealthy meal or an unhealthy snack. Okay, so those were the principles. So generally speaking, is intuitive eating a good practice? Is it something that you should be following? I do think that some of its principles, like stopping when you're full, managing your emotions without the use of food, and choosing generally healthier options without overstressing about some unhealthy options here and there, are great and that they should be followed by everyone. Now about intuitive eating as a whole, I think it's great for certain people at certain periods of their lives. Now let's get the obvious one out of the way first. Intuitive eating is not particularly going to help you lose weight, apart from a few principles. In fact, the writers themselves state that intuitive eating is not meant as a weight loss tool. However, intuitive eating may in fact help you develop a healthier relationship with food, which can be very important when you eventually want to lose weight. Remember that intuitive eating came as an answer to people overstressing and being very neurotic about following a specific nutrition plan or sticking to a specific calorie intake. If you're a person that feels burned out from dieting, or even worse, have developed unhealthy relationships with food because of chronic dieting, then I think that you should give intuitive eating a try. Now that said, to me, intuitive eating seems like an overcorrection at some times, admittedly to a pretty common problem. Sure, you don't want to be too stressed out and overly anxious about following a nutrition plan or a calorie plan, but that doesn't necessarily mean that counting calories and following a plan is inherently bad. Keep in mind that two people may follow the exact same nutrition plan but react to it completely differently on a psychological level. One person may be more relaxed and confident about following the plan, while the other person may be always anxious and very stressed out. And I think this highlights two main issues. The first is that people don't spend the time to build the habits that are necessary for them to actually follow a nutrition plan and not seem very difficult for them. And the second is that many people are just not psychologically ready or equipped to follow a certain type of plan without, breaking down and overreacting. So when talking about habits, if you go from 0 to 100, then you're obviously putting too much pressure on yourself. Now imagine a person going from eating pizzas and sweets all the time immediately to eating, chicken breast, quinoa, and salads all the time. Now obviously that person puts way too much stress on themselves. They don't take the necessary steps that are required to change their life around, and they're gonna be feeling burnt out very, very quickly. Again, I say it all the time, small habits over a long period of time. Intuitive eating as a whole promotes listening to your body's natural cues and following its natural tendencies. But the issue that I have with that, and the reason why I'm a little bit critical about that, is because it's not always the best solution for you to follow your body's natural tendencies. Because your body's natural tendencies aren't going to be always aligned with your personal goals. For example, from an evolutionary standpoint, our body doesn't like losing weight. It's as simple as that. Back in the good old days, food was scarce. Our body has a natural tendency to crave high-calorie foods and conserve energy. Now, just because your body's natural tendency is to store up food, is to eat a lot of calories and store up energy, doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing that. The problem is that our body's natural tendencies have evolved for thousands of years when humans were dealing with hard times, when they were dealing with a scarcity of food, with a lot of dangers, and they don't necessarily help that much in modern society. So going by the belief that if you follow your body's natural tendencies, then you're going to always be at a healthy weight and generally always be healthy, then that would be implying that overweight people don't follow their body's natural tendencies. But I would tend to disagree with that. I would say that your body's natural tendencies are conditioned, that what your body considers a natural way of eating is probably how it's used to eating over a long period of time. So if you've been eating 4,000 calories for 10 years, then your body is probably going to consider natural eating 4,000 calories a day. What I'm basically saying is that just because your body naturally gravitates towards something doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best option for you. And for another example that's not actually related to fitness or nutrition is your comfort zone. Your mind naturally wants to stay within its comfort zone. For example, back in the ancient times, if you went somewhere that you've never been before, there was always the possibility of some dangerous animal being there and tearing you to shreds. But this doesn't really apply in modern society, and the fact that we naturally want to stay within our comfort zones does more harm than it does good. In my opinion, many times what you should be following is what's best for your personal goals and not what feels right. But this is just my personal opinion, and whether or not you choose to put your goals over your personal feelings is up to you to decide. In any case, I think intuitive eating is indeed a good practice for people that have developed unhealthy relationships with food, as well as people that are looking to take a well-deserved break from traditional dieting. I think it's not a good practice for people that are currently on some sort of physical goal that requires them to optimize their nutrition, such as, yes, weight loss. This was definitely a long video. Thanks for sticking around for so long. If you like the video, then like ratings are very appreciated, and also feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more content just like this. Thank you for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.